All right, let's dive right into a really fascinating scientific showdown. We're talking about two absolute giants in the world of cognitive science, Steven Pinker and Jerry Fodor. And they are going head-to-head on one of the biggest questions you can possibly ask. How does our mind actually work?
But here's the real head-scratcher. These two guys, they actually agree on a lot of the fundamental ideas. So how did they end up in such a fierce, public, and pretty stark opposition? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to unpack today.
And it's wild, right? Just look at how much common ground they share. Both of them think the mind is a kind of computer. They both agree it's made up of specialized parts, an idea Fodor himself made famous. And they both believe our minds come with a lot of built-in structure, thanks to biology and evolution. This agreement is exactly what makes their fight so revealing. So let's get to the theory at the heart of this whole thing. In his massive book, How the Mind Works, Pinker lays out his big idea, that our mind is basically a collection of computational organs. Think of them as tools that were shaped by natural selection over millions of years to solve the real-world problems our ancestors faced. And what was Fodor's reaction to this grand theory? Well, he didn't mince words. It was an absolute categorical takedown. He didn't just disagree with a few points. He said the entire thing was wrong, wrong, wrong. And that sets the stage for this major intellectual clash over three key ideas. So, first up, the clash over the word computation. When we say the mind is a computer, what kind of computer are we actually talking about? Because, as it turns out, the answer to that question changes everything. So, Fodor builds his entire argument around a very specific and, let's be honest, kinda ancient model of a computer, the Turing Machine. This was a theoretical concept from the 1930s. It was a mathematical tool, never ever meant to be a blueprint for a real machine, let alone a model for the squishy, complex human brain.
Fodor's big critique is that a Turing machine is just hopelessly simplistic. It's rigid, it's stuck in a box, just following one simple rule at a time. He says there's no way it could ever perform what philosophers call abduction, which is really just our incredible, almost magical human knack for common-sense reasoning. You know, seeing the big picture and making intuitive leaps.
And this is where Pinker comes back with this absolutely killer rebuttal. He basically points out that Fodor is attacking a theory that nobody, especially not him, ever actually proposed. Fodor spent all this time building up this simplistic Turing machine model of the mind, just so he could knock it down. It's a classic straw man argument.
So what did Pinker actually mean by computation? Well, his concept is way broader and way more sophisticated. He's talking about a whole system of what he calls mechanical rationality. This can include things like parallel processing, fuzzy logic, weighing probabilities, stuff that sounds a whole lot more like a real brain and absolutely nothing like that simple tape and scanner machine Fodor was going on about.
Okay, so if the mind isn't a rigid old Turing machine, how does Pinker's more complex model actually explain our common-sense reasoning? How does his version of a computer solve that tricky problem of abduction?
Pinker's idea here is just brilliant. He uses the metaphor of soap-film computation. Think about it. When you blow a bubble, it instantly finds the shape with the least possible surface area. There's no tiny engineer inside telling it what to do. The perfect answer just emerges from countless tiny local interactions between molecules. Pinker thinks the mind works the same way, using these huge constraint networks, where millions of tiny calculations all settle almost instantly on the best overall answer.
And that brings us to the second major point of disagreement, which is all about the mind's structure. Is it one big general purpose thinking machine, or is it broken up into specialized parts?
Pinker's core analogy is that the mind is structured a lot like the body. You know, your body isn't just one big blob of cells, right? It has a circulatory system, a digestive system, and so on. Well, Pinker argues the mind has organs of computation, specialized systems for different kinds of thinking.
And he's not just talking in abstracts. He means concrete mental tools, a system for navigating the world, another one for understanding numbers, a whole dedicated psychology for figuring out what other people are thinking, and a full suite of social emotions like trust and guilt to guide how we interact.
And here's the key part, where they completely talk past each other again. See, when Fodor hears specialized, he thinks of his own very strict theory of encapsulated modules. These are like processors that are completely sealed off from each other. But Pinker's view is much more like actual biological organs. Yes, they're specialized, but they're also deeply integrated. They interact, they share components, and they work together to create a functioning whole. It's another case of arguing about definitions. And that leads us to the final and maybe the deepest disagreement of them all, the role of evolution. Does looking at our deep evolutionary past actually tell us anything useful about how our minds work right now?
Fodor's position here is surprisingly simple. He just argues that the mind's one and only job is to figure out what's true, full stop. And if that's its goal, why do we even need a complicated story about evolution and survival? The search for truth for him is its own reason for being.
But Pinker comes back with a massive reality check. If our minds are these beautiful truth-seeking machines, then why are we so incredibly good at believing things that are demonstrably false? From simple errors in physics to massive self-deception and superstition, human history is basically a catalog of systematic irrationality. That really suggests that truth can't be the mind's only goal.
Instead, Pinker offers an evolutionary perspective. He says our minds are ultimately designed for fitness, for survival and reproduction. And sometimes that goal is in direct conflict with finding pure truth. Sometimes a good enough shortcut is way better than a costly, difficult truth. Sometimes believing what your tribe believes is more important for your survival than being objectively correct. And sometimes the best way to fool other people is to first fool yourself.
So, after all this intellectual sparring, what's the big takeaway? Why does this pretty academic debate actually matter for how we understand ourselves?
This table sums it up perfectly. On every single point of contention, Fodor attacks a rigid, simplified, extreme version of Pinker's theory, a straw man. Pinker's actual views on computation, on specialization, and on evolution are way more nuanced, more flexible, and, frankly, more biologically plausible.
So the crucial lesson here is that they don't really disagree on the big picture. The real battle is over definitions. It shows us that in science, real progress often comes from getting super precise about what we mean by big words like computation or module. Understanding these subtle distinctions is what really sharpens our thinking. And all of this leads us with a final and maybe a little unsettling thought to chew on. If Pinker is right, if our minds are really built for survival first and truth second, it forces you to ask a deeply personal question. What useful, comforting, or socially binding illusions might you be living with right now?